At exactly 2:04 a.m., a single dad was woken by a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. A woman's voice, barely above a whisper, said 6 words that changed everything. "If you don't come now, you'll regret it." He could have ignored it. He almost did, but something about her voice and what it reminded him of made him get up, grab his keys, and drive into the night. What he found when he knocked on that door was not at all what he expected. Before we begin this unforgettable story of connection healing and the miracle of showing up, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the moments that move the heart and remind us what truly matters. Now, let's begin. Single Dad got a wrong call at 2 a.m., but when he knocked, she whispered, "Stay, just until morning." The phone rang, once sharp, shrill out of place in the silence of the night. Luke Brennan jolted upright in bed, heart pounding. His apartment was dark except for the digital clock glowing 2:04 a.m. in red. He reached for the phone with the instincts of a man who had once answered midnight emergencies for a living. "Hello, Static." Then a woman's voice, soft and breathless, came through. "I didn't mean to call you. I thought? Never mind." Luke blinked, trying to shake off the sleep. "Wait, are you okay?" Silence again. A shaky inhale on the other end. "If you don't come now, you'll regret it." Her voice cracked like a whisper wrapped in tears. Before he could respond, the call dropped. Luke stared at the screen. Unknown number. No voicemail. The apartment was quiet again, too quiet. He glanced across the hall where his 8-year-old daughter Emma slept curled beneath her Star Wars blanket. She hadn't stirred. He could have let it go. He should have let it go. But there was something in her voice, something fractured familiar, and something else. She'd used the phrase porch light. That word did something to him. It curled around the back of his memory like smoke dragging up a moment he'd buried deep the last night with his wife Anna. She'd been crying in the kitchen dishes, still in the sink, baby Emma already asleep. He had been too tired to talk, too drained to notice the warning signs. As he'd gone upstairs, she had called after him with a strange, trembling voice, "Don't forget to turn off the porch light." The next morning, she was gone. Luke's jaw clenched. His grip tightened around the phone. He opened his laptop, clicked into his call log, and ran a reverse search on the number. It pinged back to an address on Linden Avenue less than 20 minutes away. He remembered that area. Run-down apartment buildings, brick with peeling paint. He'd fixed a fire panel there 2 years ago. Was he being stupid? Probably. But what if he wasn't? Luke got up, pulled on his boots, a hoodie, and his old fire department jacket. He scribbled a note and left it by Emma's bedside. "Quick work thing. Be back soon. Stay in bed. Love you." The wind howled as Luke pulled into the lot behind the apartment building. Rain had started, not a storm yet, but the air felt strange, heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. He climbed the steps to the 3rd floor, passing a flickering hallway light. The place looked worse than he remembered, mildewed carpets, paint bubbling at the corners. He reached 3C, the door at the end of the hall, and knocked. Nothing. He hesitated, then knocked again, louder this time. The door clicked, just slightly, then creaked open 2 inches. Luke stepped back instinctively. "Hello, someone called me from this number. Is everything all right?" There was a pause, then a rustle of movement. The door opened wider. She stood barefoot in the doorway, hair-tangled eyes rimmed red, her robe hanging open over a faded t-shirt. Pale, thin, exhausted, but not afraid of him. Just empty. Her voice was barely audible. "Stay. Just until morning." Luke hesitated. Every alarm bell in his head went off, but none of them screamed danger. Only grief. He started, but she had already turned her back to him, leaving the door wide open. Inside, the apartment was cold, sparse. No pictures on the walls, a couch with no cushions, piles of crumpled paper scattered on the floor like fallen leaves. A candle burned low in the corner beside an unopened bottle of wine. She sank into the armchair, curled her legs under her, and stared at nothing. Luke stood by the door for a long second, unsure what to do. Then, slowly, he stepped inside and closed it gently behind him. He didn't sleep. She didn't speak. At 3:17 a.m. she scribbled something in a notebook. At 4:01 a.m. she cried silently, one hand over her mouth, the other clutching a crumpled child's drawing with a name scrawled at the bottom. Daniel. At 4:49 a.m. she fell asleep in the chair, head tilted against the wall, tears still wet on her cheeks. Luke sat across the room on the floor, watching her, watching the candle flicker. He didn't know who she was, but he'd seen that look before, on Anna's face. The night before, she took too many pills and left a baby without a mother. At 6:02 a.m. dawn crept through the rain-smeared windows. The woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, surprised for a second to see him still there. "You stayed," she said, like it was the strangest thing anyone had ever done. "I said I would." She sat up slowly. Her voice was hoarse. "You don't even know my name." "No, but you called me." She studied him like that. Answer meant something she hadn't expected. "My name's Madeline," she said finally. Luke nodded. "Luke." A quiet pause stretched between them. She looked down at the drawing in her lap. "I don't think I meant to call you." Luke stood. "But you did, and I came." He didn't ask questions, didn't pry. He just opened the door, stepped out into the now blue morning, and left the apartment behind. But as he descended the stairs, something inside him shifted. A weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying lightened just a little, and behind him in apartment 3C, a woman who hadn't spoken her own name in over a year sat holding the picture of her son and staring out the window for the first time in weeks. The porch light was still on. Luke hadn't told anyone where he'd been. Not his boss when he showed up late for a wiring job at a bakery in Midtown. Not his neighbor who picked up Emma from school when the job ran long. And certainly not Emma herself who chirped over mac and cheese that night about a drawing she'd made of their family, including their dog, even though they didn't have one. He almost told her, almost said, "I sat in a stranger's living room this morning while she cried in her sleep." But he didn't. Because it didn't make sense. Because even saying it out loud might break whatever strange, fragile thing had happened between him and the woman who called at 2:04 a.m. Her name was Madeline. She hadn't asked him to come back. But 2 nights later, as the sun fell behind gray clouds, Luke found himself back on Linden Avenue. Just driving by, he told himself. Then he was parked. Then he was at the 3rd-floor landing. And then he was knocking. The door opened quicker this time. Not wide, but enough for him to see the shadow in her eyes had changed. Not softer, but more alert, more aware. "You again," she said flat, but not unkind. He nodded. "Me again. I didn't call." "I know." She studied him, one hand on the doorframe. "Why did you come back?" Luke hesitated. "Honestly, I don't know." A flicker of something unreadable passed across her face. Disbelief, maybe. Or understanding. Hard to tell with someone who wore silence like armor. Finally, she stepped aside. Luke walked in. The apartment still looked the same. Still cold, still sparse. But something had shifted, subtle, invisible. The air didn't press against him the way it had before. The crumpled papers were gone. The candle had been replaced with a small desk lamp. There was a coffee mug on the counter with a spoon in it. Evidence of movement, of presence. Madeline sat across from him, cross-legged on the couch, her hands clasped in her lap. "I've been clean for 8 months," she said suddenly without preamble. Luke blinked. Clean pills. Anti-anxiety meds. Sleeping pills. I was mixing them. Not because I wanted to die, just because I didn't want to feel anything. She gave a bitter half-laugh. Turns out there's a difference. He didn't speak, didn't flinch, just listened. She looked down. "I stopped writing. That was when I knew something was really broken. I'd been writing since I was 12. television screenplays, commercials, even awful little jingles for credit unions. It was what made me me. Luke leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What happened? She hesitated. Then his name was Daniel. He was 6. He got sick, but I didn't see the signs. I was finishing a script. I told him I'd play with him after dinner. He never made it to dinner. The words landed heavy in the room. Luke swallowed hard. He didn't say, "It's not your fault." She would have swatted that away like a gnat. Instead, he asked quietly, "How long ago?" 2 years. Almost to the day. She exhaled. I didn't tell anyone the date. Didn't want flowers, or pity, or remembrance posts. She looked at him. I called you because I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't remember what it felt like to ask for help. Luke let the silence breathe. Then he said, I didn't come back because I felt sorry for you. That caught her off guard. I came back, he continued, because I know what it's like to miss the signs, to lose someone and spend every morning wondering what you could have done different. She didn't respond, but her shoulders relaxed. My wife, Anna, he added. She had postpartum depression. I missed it. She left a note, but it didn't say much. Just, you weren't looking, but it's not your fault. I still don't know if I believe her. Madeline closed her eyes, letting that sink in. They sat there for several minutes. The city hummed outside. Cars hissed along the wet street. A dog barked somewhere far off. Then Madeline spoke again. Do you want coffee? Luke smiled, surprised by the softness in her voice. Sure. She moved like someone who hadn't had company in years. Awkward, but not ashamed. She spooned instant coffee into mismatched mugs, added boiling water, and pushed one toward him without comment. Luke took a sip. It was bitter, but warm. There was a knock at the door. Madeline froze. Luke turned toward it. You expecting anyone? She shook her head slowly. Another knock. Then the creak of the doorknob turning from the outside. Madeline's face drained of color. Luke stood immediately, protective instinct flaring. He moved between her and the door, half expecting a landlord, a mistake, a threat. But when the door opened, it wasn't a man. It was a woman in her 60s, carrying a grocery bag. Oh, the woman said, startled. Sorry, didn't mean to intrude. Madeline let out a shaky breath. Mrs. Peterson. It's okay. The older woman stepped in slowly. She wore a red scarf and smelled faintly of lavender and laundry detergent. I hadn't seen you in a while, Mrs. Peterson said gently. Thought I'd bring some soup. Madeline managed a smile. Thank you. Mrs. Peterson's eyes flicked to Luke. And this is a friend, Madeline said quickly. She didn't look at him when she said it, but something in the word friend felt like a hand reaching out. Mrs. Peterson smiled knowingly. Well, that's good to hear. She set the bag on the counter, then added quietly, It's good to see the light on in here again. And with that, she left. After she was gone, Madeline stood motionless for a moment, then turned to Luke. I hadn't talked to her in months. You don't have to explain, he said. She nodded. Her voice came quieter this time. I want to remember how to be part of the world again. Luke smiled. You just did. For the first time, her eyes softened, not just with grief, but with something like hope. And for the first time since he lost Anna, Luke felt something shift in him, too. They drank coffee until the mugs were empty. And the porch light stayed on. Luke didn't go back to Madeleine's apartment for a week. It wasn't because he didn't want to. It was because he didn't know what came next. He wasn't used to this. The fragile closeness of two people who had met at the edge of emotional ruin. There were no rules for it, no blueprint, and certainly no guarantee that if he walked through that door again, she'd let him in physically or otherwise. So he gave her space. In the meantime, he focused on Emma. He fixed the wobbly leg on her favorite drawing table, helped her build a Lego castle with a dragon and a taco stand. He made pancakes in the shape of her initials. He pretended his chest didn't ache every time she asked if he was okay. One night, as he tucked her into bed, she asked, "Did Mommy have bad days, too?" Luke paused, heart-clenching. Emma had only been 3 when Anna passed. Her memories were fragmented glimpses more than stories. "She did," he answered gently. "But she always loved you, even on the bad days." Emma seemed to accept that, curling into her pillow. "She still knows when I'm sad," she said. "Sometimes I feel her." Luke didn't speak. He just stroked her hair until she fell asleep. The next afternoon, he had a job fixing the hallway lighting in a crumbling building near the north side. As he worked, he glanced out the window and saw Linden Avenue in the distance. By the time he'd packed up his toolbox, his feet were already leading him toward it. He told himself he was just walking by again, just checking in. But when he reached the steps of her building, he didn't hesitate. He climbed. And he knocked. Madeline answered, wearing jeans and a loose black sweater, her hair pinned up messily. Her eyes were clearer than the last time, but cautious. "Hi," Luke said. She studied him, then opened the door wider. "Hi." He stepped inside, heart-hammering for no reason he could name. The apartment had changed. Not drastically, but meaningfully. A blanket now covered the couch. A new potted plant sat by the window, its leaves bright green against the gray light outside. A stack of clean dishes sat in the sink. There was music playing softly from an old speaker in the corner, instrumental jazz, warm and mellow. Luke took it all in. "You've been redecorating," he said with a half-smile. Madeline shrugged. "I needed the place to feel less like a mausoleum." She poured 2 cups of coffee without asking and handed one to him. They sat across from each other again, but this time the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was alive, like a bridge slowly being rebuilt, plank by plank. Luke finally asked, "How've you been?" Madeline sipped her coffee, thinking. "Better. Not great, but I started waking up without dread in my throat. That's something." He nodded. "That is something." She looked at him, voice softer. "And you still haunted?" He met her gaze. "Every day. But Emma keeps me grounded. Kids are better at that than they know." Madeline set her cup down. "You're a good father." Luke chuckled dryly. "Some days, maybe." "No," she insisted. "You stayed. That night. You stayed. You didn't even know me, and you stayed." Luke leaned forward. "You didn't need someone who knew you. You just needed someone who saw you." Those words landed somewhere deep behind her ribs. Later that afternoon, Luke's phone buzzed. A FaceTime call from Emma. Madeline caught the name and stood as if to give him privacy, but Luke waved her back. He swiped to answer, holding the phone up. "Hey, Peanut," he said. Emma grinned from her bedroom, a cardboard crown askew on her head. "Look what I made." She held up a drawing crayons everywhere. It showed 3 stick figures under a yellow sun. One was clearly Luke. The second was Emma. The third had long brown hair. Luke blinked. "Who's that?" Emma grinned. "That's your friend. The lady. She looked sad, so I drew her with us." "Is she still sad?" Madeline's breath caught. She'd only heard Emma's voice once over FaceTime that night and hadn't known it would stick like a song you couldn't shake. Luke smiled gently. "She's getting better." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Tell her I said hi." Luke lowered the phone slightly and turned it toward Madeline. She looked caught off guard but smiled, small and tentative. "Hi, Emma," she said softly. Emma beamed. "You sound nice." Madeline laughed, quiet but real. "Thank you." Luke ended the call after a few more words and slipped the phone into his pocket. "She's got a gift," he said, "of seeing people. I think she gets it from her mom." Madeline's smile dimmed slightly. "I never had that. I was always in my own world, writing about people instead of connecting with them." Luke looked at her. "Maybe now you're doing both." The sun began to dip outside the window. Luke stood to leave. At the door, Madeline touched his arm. "Can I show you something?" He nodded. She led him to the small hallway that led to her bedroom. At the end of it hung a single framed photo, a little boy with wild brown hair and a chocolate-stained smile. He was sitting in a pile of autumn leaves, arms thrown wide. "This is Daniel," she said. Luke studied the photo. "He's beautiful. He was always singing," she said. "Nonsense songs. Off-key. Loud." Her voice wavered. When he died, the silence was unbearable. Luke looked at her gently. "Then let's fill it again." She met his eyes. However you can," he said. "Write, talk, cry, laugh again. Let people in." Madeline stared at the photo. Then, in a voice that cracked just enough to reveal the truth behind it, whispered, "I don't remember the last thing I said to him." Luke swallowed. "I don't remember the last thing Anna said to me either." Madeline turned to him slowly, her expression raw. And in that moment, grief became something shared, not just endured. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. They simply stood side by side, two strangers who had once lived in silence, now learning how to speak again. And outside, for the first time since Daniel's death, the porch light flicked on before sunset, not for safety, but as an invitation. The next time Luke came by, he brought a toolbox, but not because anything was broken. Madeline had left him a message. "Do you know anything about ceiling fans that rattle like ghosts?" It was the first time she had initiated contact. When he arrived, she greeted him at the door with a towel slung over her shoulder and the faint smell of something baking in the air. "You cook, now," he teased. "Don't get excited," she said. "It's just store-bought cookie dough I forgot I had. But you're baking." She shrugged, but he saw the truth in her half-smile. Little things meant something again. The ceiling fan in her bedroom was crooked, one blade slightly warped. Luke climbed onto a chair and began to work, while Madeline sat cross-legged on the bed nursing a cup of coffee. Her bedroom was modest, clean. But what struck him most was what was missing: no clock on the nightstand, no phone charger, no calendar on the wall. "You don't keep track of time in here?" he asked, glancing down from the fan. Madeline hesitated. "I used to. But after Daniel died, clocks felt cruel. I'd lie awake watching minutes pass like they were taunting me. So I took them all out." Luke nodded. "Makes sense. I didn't want to know how long I'd been lying in the dark, or how many hours since I last cried. It was easier to float." He tightened the last screw and stepped down from the chair. "But now I think I'm ready to start keeping time again." They sat at her kitchen table afterward, eating slightly burned cookies with cracked edges. "I had a therapist once," she said between bites. "She told me grief has no timeline, that it shows up uninvited and overstays its welcome." Luke chuckled. "Sounds about right." She also said healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without drowning. Luke's expression sobered. "Do you still see her?" Madeline shook her head. "Stopped going after a few months. I wasn't ready to let go of the pain. It felt like if I did, I'd be letting go of Daniel." Luke stirred his coffee. "You ever think of going back?" She looked at him, quiet. "I'm thinking about it now." They didn't need to say more. The fact that she'd said it out loud was a seismic shift. Later that afternoon, Madeline asked if Luke wanted to see something. She led him to a narrow storage closet off the hallway. Inside were 3 cardboard boxes neatly stacked. "These were his," she said. "I haven't opened them since the day I packed them." Luke watched her carefully. "Are you sure I don't know?" she admitted. "But I think I want to remember him in full, not just the last day." She opened the top box. Inside, a worn teddy bear with a missing ear, a red plastic fire truck, a small denim jacket with a dinosaur patch on the sleeve. Luke reached in and pulled out a spiral notebook with Daniel's name scribbled on the cover. Madeline took it from his hands, trembling. She opened to a random page. Inside were stick figures, lopsided but joyful, and beneath one, me and Mommy going to space. Madeline covered her mouth. "He used to say I was the best spaceship captain in the world." Luke knelt beside her. "You still are." She cried quietly, not the kind of sobbing that breaks like a storm, but the kind that leaks from deep within, soft and clean. A release, not a collapse. He stayed with her as she opened the second box, then the third. Piece by piece, memory by memory, they assembled a boy's life from the artifacts he'd left behind. Not a shrine, but a story. As the sun dipped lower outside, Madeline said something Luke didn't expect. "I want to write again." He looked at her. "Are you serious?" She nodded. "I want to tell a story about a woman who lost everything, and didn't know she was still allowed to live." Luke smiled. "Sounds familiar." She finds herself through someone she didn't expect. Someone who reminds her she's not broken, just bruised. He reached across the table, touched her hand. "What will you call it?" Madeline paused. Her eyes scanned the room, then landed on the single light still burning on the porch. "The porch light," she said softly, "because someone left it on when she couldn't find her way home." Luke's throat tightened. "You should write that." "I will," she said, "but not alone. Not this time." Just before he left, Madeline walked him to the door and handed him something. It was the drawing Emma had sent folded carefully, now kept in a sleeve. "I kept it," she said, "because that girl. She reminded me what it felt like to be seen again, and I want to be the kind of person worthy of being in her picture." Luke looked at the drawing. "You already are." She smiled, real and wide, with no shadows in it. Then she did something she hadn't done in all the times he'd visited. She stepped forward and hugged him. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't desperate, it was recognition. A thank you from one survivor to another. And as Luke walked away into the cool night, he realized something profound. He wasn't just helping Madeline rebuild her world. She was helping him remember how to live in his. Behind him, from the third-floor window, the porch light glowed softly, constant, unwavering. A beacon for anyone lost. Luke didn't intend to read the pages. He was only looking for a napkin. It was a late Thursday afternoon. Emma had a half-day from school, and they'd stopped by Madeline's apartment with takeout tomato soup, grilled cheese, and brownies that Emma insisted were almost better than school lunch. They ate on the living room floor, cross-legged on a blanket, as if the space had always been theirs. Madeline had laughed more that day than Luke had ever seen. Emma had even asked if she could call her Miss Maddie. Madeline said yes, then immediately excused herself to the kitchen before tears could betray her composure. While cleaning up, Luke had reached into a drawer in search of a napkin and pulled out something that wasn't a napkin at all. A stack of pages, typed, numbered, titled, "The Porch Light." He froze. For a second he told himself to put it back. But then his eyes caught a line of dialogue just above a scene heading NT. Living room, night. The woman sits in the dark, her hands shaking. She's called the wrong number, or maybe the right one. The man at the door doesn't ask questions, he just stays. Luke's breath hitched. It was them. Or rather, her version of them. He turned another page, then another, until a printed sentence cracked something open in him. "I didn't ask him to save me. I only needed someone who wouldn't leave." Behind him, footsteps. Madeline's voice sharp. "Why are you reading?" That Luke spun around, startled. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, her expression shuddered. Not angry, worse. Wounded. "I wasn't trying to." He began holding up the pages like a white flag. It was in the drawer. "I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to read it." "I know," he said quietly. "But it's beautiful. That's not the point." Her voice trembled. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest as if trying to hold herself together. "It's not finished," she said. "It's messy and raw and probably terrible. It's honest." He stepped toward her. "Madeline, it's the most honest thing I've read in years." She shook her head. "You don't understand. That script, it's the only place I can put what I can't say out loud. If people read it, if you read it, it becomes real. And I don't know if I'm ready for that." Luke lowered the pages. "I'm sorry," he said. I should have asked. I should have respected your space." The silence stretched long between them. Then she whispered, "Daniel's name is in there." He looked up. "I changed something," she said, her eyes glassy. "But not that. I couldn't bring myself to rename him. I wanted his name to live somewhere that wouldn't fade." Luke stepped closer. "That's not messy. That's love." She let out a bitter breath. "It's guilt." He said nothing, so she said more. "I wasn't with him when he died," she said, voice low and shaking. "He was at school. They called me. I didn't answer. I was on a rewrite deadline. I ignored 3 calls before I picked up. When I finally got to the hospital, he was already—" Her throat closed. "Already gone." Luke's hands curled into fists, useless at his sides. "I've carried that," she whispered, "like a chain, around my neck, every single day." He took a step toward her, but she moved away. "Don't try to fix it. I'm not. Don't tell me it wasn't my fault. I won't." Madeline blinked, surprised. "I know what guilt feels like," Luke said softly. "I used to hear Anna crying in the shower. I thought it was normal. New mom exhaustion. I missed it. I told her to rest more, to get fresh air, to try journaling, like any of that could pull her out of it. She needed help, and I was too proud or too blind or too afraid to see it." His voice broke. "She trusted me, and I didn't see her slipping." For a long moment they stood there, 2 people bearing the unbearable. Then Madeline asked, "Do you hate yourself for it?" Luke didn't answer right away. Some days, he admitted. But then Emma laughs, or draws something ridiculous, or tells me I'm the best pancake maker in the universe, and I realize grief doesn't get to erase what's left. She exhaled. "How do you forgive yourself?" "You don't," he said. "Not at once. Not entirely. You just keep showing up anyway." Madeline looked at the stack of pages still in his hand. "Is it really beautiful?" she asked, small and unsure. "It's truth," he said, "and the world needs more of that." She reached for the pages. Her fingers brushed his. "I was going to burn it," she confessed. "Don't," he said. "Please, don't." Later, after Luke and Emma left, Emma giving Madeline a lopsided origami dog she'd made from a napkin, Madeline sat alone in her living room, script in her lap. She read it, start to finish. No edits, no rewrites. When she reached the last line, and for the first time in a long time she left the porch light on. She closed the binder, pressed it to her chest, and cried. But this time the tears weren't made of guilt. They were made of release, of something finally breaking open, of something perhaps forgiving itself. Outside, on the 3rd floor of a quiet building on Linden Avenue, the porch light glowed once again. But this time, it wasn't for someone who was lost. It was for someone who had finally decided to be found. The envelope was folded 3 times and sealed with a single sticker shaped like a smiling sun. Luke found it tucked into the side pocket of his jacket as he was getting ready for work, right where Emma often left him. Tiny notes, grocery reminders, doodles of pancakes, or clumsy affirmations like, "You are stronger than the Hulk Daddy." But this note was different. It had a name written in bright pink marker for Miss Maddie. Luke stood, frozen jacket half on his breath, catching unexpectedly in his throat. He ran his thumb along the edge of the envelope, hesitating. Emma was still asleep. She always was when he left this early for electrical jobs. He glanced toward her room where a sliver of soft morning light leaked through her curtains. He didn't open the letter. He just folded it, carefully slipped it into his wallet, and carried it with him through the noise of the day. That evening, when he arrived at Madeline's apartment, she greeted him at the door with flour on her cheek and a towel slung over her shoulder. "I attempted banana bread," she said with mock seriousness. "It's either brilliant or tragic. Possibly both." He smiled. Tragedy and carbs. Perfect combo. She stepped aside to let him in her small kitchen already warm with the scent of cinnamon and overripe bananas. "I brought something," Luke said, reaching into his wallet. "Well, someone else did." He handed her the envelope. Madeline turned it over, slowly, eyes flickering with emotion the moment she saw her name in pink. "She made this for me." Luke nodded. "Didn't tell me. Just left it in my jacket. Like she knew." Madeline didn't open it right away. She stared at it like it might change her, or undo her, or both. Finally, she peeled the sticker and unfolded the letter. There were only a few lines written in the uneven, earnest scrawl of a child still learning the rhythm of words. "Dear Miss Maddie, Daddy says you are sad sometimes, but also kind. I think kind people just get extra sad because they have too much heart. That's what I think. It's okay to be sad. I get sad when Mommy is not here too, but Daddy says we are still a family. You can be part of our family if you want. I drew us all together. Love, Emma." Below the words was a simple drawing. 3 figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun. The tallest one had a brown ponytail and a heart on her shirt. Above her was the name Maddie. Madeline didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I did to deserve her kindness." "You don't have to do anything," Luke said. "Sometimes grace just finds you." She blinked rapidly, then pressed the letter against her chest. "I spent so long trying to disappear," she said. "Hiding from everyone. Friends, my agent, myself. I thought the only way to honor Daniel was to carry the pain like a torch. But that letter," she swallowed hard, "that letter feels like permission." Luke stepped closer. "To do what?" "To stop surviving and start living." He let that settle. Then, gently, "You don't have to decide everything tonight." Madeline nodded. "But I do want to write her back." That night they ate banana bread that was slightly undercooked in the center, drank lukewarm tea, and talked about nothing in particular books. They never finished movies. They both secretly hated the smell of rain on old pavement. Luke told her that Emma had once tried to run away to the neighbor's house because she thought they had better catch up. Madeline laughed so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes. Real ones this time. It felt like air returning to lungs long collapsed. After a quiet moment, Luke said, "Have you thought any more about the script?" She glanced toward the small desk in the corner where the pages of The Porch Light now rested in a neat binder. "I have," she said. "I want to finish it, not just for me, but for him, for Daniel, for anyone who thinks they've gone too far into the dark to ever come back." "You haven't," Luke said. Madeline met his eyes. "Neither have you." A few days later, Luke came home to find a sealed envelope on Emma's pillow. He recognized the handwriting instantly. Inside was a short letter written in careful script. "Dear Emma, thank you for the sunshine you carry in your heart. You reminded me that being kind is brave and that sadness doesn't mean the story is over. I'd like to be part of your family if the invitation is still open. Maybe we can draw together soon. Love, Miss Maddie." Emma squealed and immediately began preparing a new drawing. This one featured a treehouse, a dog, and a kite that was somehow also a unicorn. Luke watched her work and thought, this is what healing looks like. Not fireworks, not grand declarations, just connection restored one fragile thread at a time. The next weekend, they visited a small farmer's market together. Emma picked out pumpkins and gave Madeline strict instructions on which ones were cuddle-worthy. Luke watched the two of them laugh over tiny gourds and apple cider samples, his heart swelling with something he hadn't dared to name. Not quite love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The weightless warmth of maybe. That night, Madeline sent Luke a photo. It was Emma's letter now framed and sitting beside a new potted plant on her windowsill. Below it in marker she'd added a small handwritten note. Some days the light comes from the smallest lamp, but it's still light. Luke stared at the photo for a long time. Then he typed 2 words in reply, "Keep writing." He didn't just mean the script. He meant everything. Because the girl who once ripped pages in anger was now building new ones, and they were filled with color, with kindness, with hope. And maybe that was the beginning of something even better than healing. It was the beginning of belonging. The door creaked open slowly, hesitant as always. Luke stepped inside carrying 2 coffees and a bag of bagels. The scent of warm cinnamon greeted him first, followed by the now familiar quiet hum of soft music drifting from the old speaker in the corner. Madeline was at her writing desk, back turned to him, sleeves rolled up, hair twisted in a messy knot that had become her unofficial writing uniform. She didn't look up when he entered, but she said, "I think I finally cracked the scene." Luke smiled and set the food down on the coffee table. The scene. "The one I could never finish," she said, swiveling around in her chair. Her face was brighter than he'd seen it, eyes clearer. Alive. Where the woman admits that she doesn't want to be rescued, she just wants to be seen. To be heard. Luke sat across from her, watching the spark of momentum in her voice. And what changed Madeline paused, the smile softening. "You brought soup. You listened. You let me fall apart without trying to tape me back together." He didn't speak. She didn't need him to. She grabbed a few loose pages from her desk and handed them over. "Read it." He did, slowly, carefully. And when he reached the last line, his eyes didn't leave the page. He whispered, "She asks him to stay." Madeline nodded, "Just until morning." Later, they took a walk through a quiet neighborhood park one Emma loved, where tree branches draped over gravel paths like open arms. A cool wind rustled through fading leaves, and the sun dipped low, casting the world in the soft amber of pre-dusk. "I want to include a song in the scene." Madeline said, her hands buried in her coat pockets, something the woman remembers from childhood, something her son used to hum. Luke tilted his head. "A lullaby, sort of. Not one everyone knows. A made-up tune, maybe. Imperfect. Real." She paused. Daniel had one. She began humming a halting off-key melody with no real shape, just rhythm and ache. It stopped Luke in his tracks. "I know that," he said. She turned to him. "How could you? I've heard Emma hum it. Or something close to it. At bedtime. I thought she made it up." Madeline stared at him, stunned. "It can't be the same." Luke nodded slowly. "Kids remember sounds more than words. Maybe Daniel sang it to her once. I don't know. But it stayed." Her voice cracked, tears rising in her throat. "Then part of him is still here." Luke didn't touch her, didn't speak. He just let her cry quietly in the middle of the path while the sun slid down behind them. When her breathing steadied, she whispered, "Put that in the movie." He nodded. "Absolutely." Back at her apartment, they recorded the lullaby, her voice shaking as she hummed, Luke quietly holding the phone. "You sure you want this raw?" he asked. "It has to be raw," she said. "This scene. It's not about closure. It's about choosing to keep the door open even if no one walks through." That night, they reenacted the scene in her living room. It wasn't planned. It started as a joke. Luke read lines from the script while Madeline adjusted the lighting with an old desk lamp. But somewhere along the way, the joking stopped and the words became too real to pretend. Luke stood by the door as written. Madeline sat in the chair, arms wrapped around her knees. He read, voice quiet, "You don't have to talk. I'll stay, just until morning." She looked up, not at the page, but at him. Her voice wasn't acting. "I don't want to be saved. I just want someone to stop walking away." Luke's throat tightened. He stepped forward just one pace closer. "I'm still here." The silence between them pulsed. Then she dropped the script. Not deliberately, not dramatically, just let it fall from her hands. Luke picked it up but didn't hand it back. Instead, he asked, "Do you ever think you wrote this scene before you lived it?" Madeline wiped her eyes. "No, I think I wrote it because I never lived it." He placed the pages on the table and knelt in front of her, voice low and sure. "You are now." Later, over tea, she said, "This script, it was never supposed to be a movie. It was my therapy, my purge. I didn't think anyone else would see it." Luke stirred his tea, but now, she looked at him steady. "Now, I think it's not mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who's ever sat in the dark and wondered if anyone would knock." Luke smiled. "That's a hell of a dedication line." She laughed, then added, "But I want it to mean something. Not just a sad story. I want it to say, you're not alone, even if you think no one sees you." He leaned back. "So, what's next?" Madeline looked at the framed letter from Emma on the shelf next to a tiny ceramic angel Daniel once painted. "I send it in," she said, "to my old agent. Or maybe someone new. But I send it. Are you scared?" "Terrified," she admitted. "Good," he said. "That means it matters." As Luke was leaving that night, Madeline walked him to the door. She hesitated, then said, "You know, you don't have to leave right away." He looked at her gentle. "I'll stay," he said, "just until morning." Her porch light flicked on behind them, bathing the hallway in a soft golden glow. This time, neither of them had to say a word. Madeline had never felt lighter. For the first time in years, she moved through her apartment with purpose, not to clean or distract, but to create. Her desk, once untouched and buried in dust, now hosted coffee-stained pages, highlighters, post-it notes with scribbled revisions. The binder for the porch light sat proudly open, page 87, staring up at her awaiting its final scene. The story was almost done, so when her phone rang, she answered with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. "Madeline Shore," she said into the receiver, surprised by the confidence in her own voice. "Madeline, my God," came the reply. "It's Joel. I can't believe it's really you." She froze. Joel Turner, her former agent, the one she hadn't spoken to since Daniel died, the one who left messages for months that she never returned. "I read your script," he continued. "Someone forwarded it, maybe by accident, but I knew instantly it was you." She opened her mouth but said nothing. "Look," he rushed on, "it's brilliant. Honest, raw, devastating, but beautiful. If you're ready, I can have this in front of the right people by Monday." Her heart stammered. "Monday," she whispered. "I've got a producer at Florence Media hungry for something just like this. All I need is your approval and a few adjustments." "Adjustments." "Only small stuff," he said quickly. "Pace the opening a bit more commercially, maybe soften the scene with the daughter's letter. It's a little too sentimental for test audiences. Oh, and the man. Maybe make him less working class. Just bump his background, more aspirational." The air in her lungs disappeared. "You want to change him?" Joel chuckled. "It's a starting point, Madeline. This is how the process works." But it wasn't how this story worked. This story, her story, was built from ashes and grief and one real man who brought soup and stayed when no one else would. Luke wasn't aspirational. He was real. And so was Emma's letter. She gripped the phone tighter. "Joel, I thank you, but I need to think." "Of course," he said quickly. "Think fast. The window won't stay open long." When Luke arrived later that night with dinner in one hand and Emma's new drawing in the other, he knew something was off the moment Madeline opened the door. Her smile was tight, her shoulders too still. "Hey," he said gently. "Hey," she replied, stepping aside. "Come in." They sat in silence longer than usual, noodles cooling in their bowls untouched. Luke waited. Then, finally, she said it. "My old agent called." Luke's heart lifted. "That's good, right? He wants to pitch the script." He grinned. "Madeline, that's incredible." She didn't meet his eyes. "He wants to change things." "Like what?" "The man. Emma's letter. The ending. The grief." Luke blinked, stunned. "He wants to change the grief." She shrugged. "Make it less heavy." "That's not a script fix," he said. "That's a rewrite of truth." Madeline exhaled sharply. "Joel's just doing what he's always done, positioning, shaping, selling. It's not personal." Luke leaned forward, voice quiet but firm. "It is personal. It's your story." She didn't respond. "Are you going to let him do it?" "I don't know," she whispered. "It's an opportunity. It could mean my name back in the world again. A second chance." Luke looked away, jaw tightening. At what cost? Don't do that. Do what? Make this about you? I'm not, he said. I'm making it about what we built. The truth you fought to put down on paper, and now someone wants to scrub it clean because it makes people uncomfortable. Madeline stood abruptly. You don't understand how this industry works. You're right, Luke said, standing too. I don't. I fix lights and wires and barely sleep. But I know what integrity looks like. She flinched. And what if I take this deal, I lose mine? He stepped back, eyes wounded. You said this story wasn't just for you anymore. She didn't answer. The silence between them became colder than any winter air. Finally, Luke set the drawing down a new one Emma had made that morning. This time, they were all sitting under a tree, and above them were words written in childlike capitals. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to be together. He didn't wait for Madeline to pick it up. He just said quietly, You already have a second chance. You just don't see it. Then he left. That night, Madeline sat alone at her desk, surrounded by the script, by Daniel's photo, by Emma's letter, by all the pieces of truth that had saved her. She opened her laptop. Joel had emailed again. Subject line, Let's move quickly. This could be big. She hovered her fingers over the keyboard, then closed the lid. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She didn't sleep. Not really. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of her own breath, wondering how something that had once felt so whole could now feel so unsteady. She wanted the world to hear the story, but not if they couldn't stomach the pain that made it real. Not if they erased the man who sat in the dark with her when everyone else turned away. Morning came quietly. She opened her window. Outside, the porch light was still on across the courtyard, faint in the sunrise, but present, unwavering. And for the first time in days, Madeline knew exactly what to do next. But first, she had to make a call. Not to Joel, to someone whose light had never asked her to shine brighter than she was. Someone who stayed, even when she nearly asked him to leave. Luke hadn't heard from Madeline in 4 days. Not a call, not a message, nothing. He told himself it was fine. She was probably editing, or sleeping, or caught up in rewrites. Maybe Joel's offer had opened a door she didn't want to close, and maybe she realized she didn't need him anymore. He still turned the porch light on every evening, just in case. The invitation came by email, not from Madeline but from Florence Media. Subject line, Private Premiere. The Porch Light Short Film Screening. Location, Florence Theater, 7 p.m. RSVP required. He stared at the screen, heart thudding. There was no personal note, no name in the body of the message, just logistics. He didn't RSVP, not because he wasn't going, because part of him needed to know if she still saw him, not just as part of the story, but as part of her life. She would look for him in the crowd. On the night of the premiere, Luke left Emma with his neighbor and changed into a collared shirt he hadn't worn since Anna's funeral. The theater was small but elegant, restored Art Deco with velvet seats and golden sconces. Inside, people milled around in black dresses and fitted blazers. Industry types, critics, artists with unreadable faces. He felt out of place the moment he walked in. No one looked his way. No one asked his name. And when he scanned the printed seating chart by the host table, there was no name reserved for him. Not Brennan. Not guest. He found a spot in the back row near the wall. Shadowed forgotten. Maybe that's where he belonged after all. Then the lights dimmed. The Florence Media logo appeared, flickered, faded. And then there she was. Madeline's name filled the screen in white letters, written and directed by Madeline Shore. He stared, breath caught in his chest. The screen turned black. And then the first line of dialogue echoed through the dark theater. If you don't come now, you'll regret it. The audience leaned forward. Luke stayed perfectly still. The story unfolded in fragments, familiar but elevated. Madeline hadn't just written what happened. She transformed it. She captured the rawness, the ache, the quiet poetry of broken people trying to learn how to speak again. There were changes, yes. Names were altered, settings tweaked. But Emma's letter remained. The man wasn't glamorous. He wasn't rich. He had work boots and tired eyes. And he stayed. Even when the woman told him not to. Even when she tried to vanish again, he stayed. Luke watched the final scene with his hands clasped tightly in his lap. On screen, the woman stood in the doorway as dawn broke. The man turned to leave. "You don't have to go," she said. He paused. "I'll stay. Just until morning." She smiled. "Then stay forever." As the screen faded to black, a hush swept over the crowd. And then applause. Thunderous rising, sustained. Luke clapped too, but gently. Not for the film. For her. A moment later, the lights returned. The crowd stood. Madeline appeared at the front of the theater, nervous, radiant in a navy dress that looked like it had been worn only after 100 second thoughts. She approached the microphone with a kind of quiet grace that only comes from surviving yourself. "Thank you," she began, her voice wavering. "This story began as a whisper. I didn't know if it would ever become more than a personal exhale." She paused. "I wrote it for someone I lost, but I finished it because of someone I found." Luke swallowed hard. She scanned the audience, and for a moment her eyes searched. The same way she'd once stared at the ceiling and asked the dark if anyone would stay. Then she saw him, and smiled. Soft, direct, undeniable. This story is for anyone who's ever left the porch light on hoping someone would come home. The audience exhaled, moved. But Luke didn't need the applause. He needed nothing more than that look. It was his seat after all, even if his name hadn't been printed on the chart. After the screening, guests mingled in the lobby. Champagne flowed, compliments echoed from producers and strangers in thick-rimmed glasses. Luke stayed by the exit. She found him there. "I thought you might not come," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "No seat reserved." Madeline winced. "That wasn't me." Joel handled the list. "I'm kidding," Luke said softly. "Kind of." She smiled. "Then seriously, I was looking for you the whole time. I noticed." A pause. "I didn't change it," she added. "The letter. The man. The truth. I saw. I wanted the world to see what saved me." Luke stepped closer. "It wasn't just me. It was you letting the door open again." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry I pushed you away," she whispered. He touched her cheek gently. "You didn't. You just got lost for a minute. Will you stay?" He leaned his forehead against hers. "I never left." That night, Madeline and Luke walked back to her apartment in silence. No grand promises, no scripted romance. Just two people who had once met in the dark now walking home under streetlights. The porch light was already on. Not for safety, not for tradition, but as a signal that the story wasn't over. And the rest of it, they'd write together. The next morning, everything felt different, but nothing had changed. The dishes were still in the sink. The blanket on Madeline's couch was still half folded as if someone had fallen asleep under it and left in a hurry. Luke sat at her kitchen table with a coffee in one hand and a quiet sense of awe in the other. Across from him, Madeline stood barefoot in pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt, her hair wild, and her expression more at peace than he'd ever seen. It wasn't that the premiere had made her whole again. It was that somehow it had let her be incomplete openly, honestly, beautifully, and feel okay anyway. "You slept?" Luke asked, studying her face. "Like a rock," she said, smiling into her mug. "For the first time in years, I didn't dream of Daniel falling away from me. I dreamed he was laughing, on a swing, pushing higher and higher." Luke reached across the table, hand resting over hers. She squeezed his fingers in return. There were no words needed for that. Later that day, they walked together to Emma's school to pick her up. It was a crisp afternoon, the kind where the sun feels more like memory than warmth, and the leaves crackled underfoot like faint applause for no particular reason. Madeline kept glancing at Luke out of the corner of her eye as if still trying to believe he was walking beside her, choosing this not out of pity or obligation, but because he wanted to be here. At the schoolyard gate, Emma spotted them and took off running her backpack, bouncing hair wild. "Miss Maddie!" She yelled, arms outstretched like she was flying. Madeline knelt instinctively. The hug nearly knocked her backward. "You came!" Emma squealed, burying her face into Madeline's neck. "I wouldn't miss it," Madeline whispered. Luke watched the two of them, his daughter and this woman who had wandered into their lives through grief and silence, and thought, this is what home feels like. Not a structure, not a legal arrangement, but the place where people meet each other exactly where they are and stay. That night, Madeline cooked. Well, tried to. She burned the rice, undercooked the salmon, and nearly cried when she realized she'd confused paprika with cinnamon. Luke laughed through the whole ordeal. Emma declared it the best bad dinner ever. They ate on the floor legs, crossed with the TV, playing some nature documentary none of them were paying attention to. Afterward, Emma curled up with a book in Luke's lap while Madeline thumbed through old photographs she hadn't dared to touch in years. At one point, she held one up. It was Daniel, grinning with his mouth full of marshmallows. "He would have loved this," she said softly. Luke looked at her. "He was here tonight." She turned surprised. In Emma's laugh, he said, "In the chaos, in your joy." Madeline's eyes welled, but this time she didn't look away. "I used to think remembering him would trap me forever," she admitted. "Now I realize. Forgetting him is what would have done that." Luke nodded. "You let him live through you now. Through this. Through us." After Emma fell asleep on the couch, Madeline and Luke stepped outside onto the small fire escape balcony just off the kitchen. Below them, the city murmured soft traffic, distant dogs' laughter that echoed from somewhere they couldn't see. "I was so sure I didn't deserve another chapter," Madeline said. "You didn't need to deserve it," Luke replied. "You just had to turn the page." They stood in silence for a moment, watching lights twinkle in the apartment windows around them. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what's next." Luke glanced over. "Work writing, all of it," she said. "I want to teach again. Not full-time, just one class. Screenwriting for healing." Luke smiled. "You'd be amazing, and I want to keep writing. Stories that matter, that let people feel. I don't care if they're small, I just want to be useful. You already are." She turned to him, eyes glinting. "And I want you. In whatever shape that looks like. If that means co-parenting or long walks and slow mornings or just eating burnt salmon for the rest of our lives, I want it." Luke laughed gently, pulling her into him. "Good," he said, "because I already bought paprika. The real one." As they stepped back inside, Madeline paused. "I have something for you." She reached into the drawer near the bookshelf and pulled out a small wrapped package. Luke opened it carefully. Inside was a single printed page bound in a simple leather frame. It was the final scene from The Porch Light. In T. Living room, early morning. The woman stands in the open doorway. The man gathers his coat, pauses. She whispers, "You can stay, if you want." He puts the coat down, "Then I will." She smiles. "Not just until morning." The porch light glows behind them, unwavering. Luke stared at the page, emotions flooding his chest. "You changed the ending," he whispered. "I didn't have to," she said. "I just finally lived it." That night, long after Emma was tucked in and the dishes were done, Luke lay beside Madeline on the couch, her head resting on his chest. Outside the window, the porch light was still on. But this time it wasn't waiting for someone to come home. It was the light you leave on when you already are. It was spring again, the kind of soft, reluctant spring that took its time arriving, where the buds on the trees hesitated and the wind still carried the memory of winter. But there was warmth in the light now, and in the way the neighborhood children laughed as they chased each other past stoops and sidewalk chalk hearts. Madeline stood in front of the small community center on 8th, and Lyndon clutching a thin folder in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. Her name was listed on the bulletin board near the front door, Writing for Healing. Instructor Madeline Shore. Thursdays 6-8 p.m. Open to all. No experience required. She stared at the sign for a moment as if trying to believe it was real. She was no longer hiding behind her work. She was walking into it on purpose with both hands open. Inside, folding chairs waited. So did a group of women in various stages of quiet heartbreak, some recently widowed, one fresh out of rehab, a young man who lost his brother to suicide. Madeline had read their applications. They hadn't come to talk about trauma. They had come to make sense of it. She exhaled and opened the door. Luke and Emma were at home preparing dinner. By now, Emma had been promoted to head of lettuce washing, a title she carried with immense pride, even if half the leaves ended up in the sink. Luke chopped vegetables, humming off-key to some old song on the radio while the oven preheated. There was no performance in it, no need to impress, just the steady rhythm of ordinary shared life. "Do you think she's nervous?" Emma asked, cradling a dripping colander. Luke looked up. "Probably." "Should we make cookies?" He grinned. "Absolutely." 2 hours later, when Madeline returned home, her cheeks were pink from the wind and her eyes bright from something deeper. Luke met her at the door. "How'd it go?" he asked. "I forgot how good it feels to give," she said, pulling off her scarf. "To sit in a room with people who are trying to stitch themselves back together with stories. They weren't looking for happy endings, just something true." "You gave them that," he said. "No," she smiled. "They gave it to me." After Emma went to bed, they sat on the balcony, legs tangled, wrapped in a blanket. The city was alive beneath them, soft jazz from a neighbor's window, distant laughter, a siren slicing through the air, only to fade away. Madeline rested her head on Luke's shoulder. "You remember the night I called you?" He laughed under his breath, vividly. "I thought it was a prank, or a scam." She smiled. "It was a mistake." "No," he said, brushing her knuckles with his thumb. "It was a wrong number, but it reached the right person." She turned to look at him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Sometimes. But I don't live in the what-ifs anymore. I live in this." He gestured to the blanket, the window glowing behind them, the framed letter from Emma still perched beside the desk lamp. "This is enough," he said. "This is everything." Madeline felt something warm move through her chest. Not adrenaline, not fear. Peace. A few weeks later, they hosted a small backyard movie night for the community. Nothing fancy, just a projector, a sheet strung between two trees, and folding chairs filled with people they loved. Emma was the announcer, of course, wearing a paper crown and holding a flashlight like a microphone. Tonight's movie, she declared, was written by Miss Maddie, and Daddy says it's about being brave and not giving up on people even when they've given up on themselves. Also, it's kind of romantic. Laughter rippled through the audience. Madeline covered her face with her hands, blushing. Luke leaned over and whispered, "You can't teach kids subtlety." "I hope she never learns it," Madeline whispered back. When the porch light started playing, no one said a word. Even though most of them had already seen it, it felt different under the stars, more intimate, more like testimony than entertainment. As the final scene played, Madeline didn't watch the screen. She watched Luke. The glow from the projector danced across his face, and she thought of the first time she saw him in that dim hallway, tired, cautious, holding nothing but a toolbox and too much kindness for one man to carry. He had no reason to stay. But he did. And now he wasn't just in her story. He was the story. After the movie ended and the chairs were being folded and the popcorn swept into piles, Luke stood in front of the small crowd. He cleared his throat. "I just want to say thank you," he said, "for showing up for her and for this. Some of you know how this started. Some don't. But what matters is that a single act of staying changed everything." He paused. "None of us know how much light we carry until someone else sees it." He glanced at Madeline, who nodded through tears. Later that night, in the quiet of their living room, Madeline picked up her old journal. Not the script, not her laptop, just ink and paper. She wrote, "Grief didn't go away, but it stopped being the only thing in the room. Love moved in, slowly, softly, without knocking, and it stayed." She closed the book, stood and turned off the lights, all except one, the porch light, still glowing, still open, not for the lost anymore, but for the ones who had finally quietly found each other, and decided to stay, forever. And that was the story of the wrong number that was right, a reminder that sometimes the smallest decisions, like answering a call you were never meant to receive, can lead to the most unexpected kind of healing. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Leave us a comment and share what part of the story touched you the most. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply reminded you of the power of kindness, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. Thank you so much for watching. We're grateful you chose to spend your time with us. Until next time, keep the light on.